In this video, a subject will complete many tests to determine if there are any muscle imbalances. They will also then complete the 4 phases of the corrective exercises continuum to improve upon these muscle imbalances. We will be specifically looking at the kinetic checkpoint of the knee. Before the subject started any activity, they completed the PAR-Q and they were available and ready to start activities. For the medical history, for past injuries, we have that the subject tore their ACL in their right knee twice when younger playing basketball. They also tore their PCL in their left knee at work a couple years ago. For surgeries, they had a patella tendon graft placed in their right knee for their ACL repairment back in 1995, hernia surgery in 2004, and PCL repairment in their left knee in 2016. The subject does currently wear knee braces on a daily basis that pulls his knees outward, as well as receiving gel injections in his knees at a local hospital to help with knee pain. For his lifestyle, he is a 911 technician, so he does go on his hands and knees, and he does have to fit in small spaces. He is moderately active, where he mostly goes out on the weekends with his friends and does housework. First, we have the standing postural assessment. This test is done to see how the subject carries their weight and their body on standing on a normal daily basis. We will be, through every test done, we will be looking at the 4 kinetic checkpoints of the body, which is the foot and ankle, the knee, the LPHC, and the shoulders. For the first view, we have the anterior view aspect. For the foot and ankle, we have that we see that the feet are slightly externally rotated, their knees bow out, and his LPHC, there is an asymmetrical weight shift to the right side. For his shoulders, there is a left shoulder elevation compared to his right side, and he has slight internal rotation. This is why you can see his knuckles. For the lateral view, the foot and ankle, there are normal findings. For the knees, they are slightly forward. For the LPHC, there is a slight anterior pelvic tilt. For his shoulders, there is slight rounding. For the last view, which is the posterior, for the foot and ankle, his feet are slightly externally rotated and his feet are not even. As you can see, his left foot is forward compared to his right foot. For his knees, they bow out, and for his LPHC, there's an asymmetrical shift of weight to the right side. For his shoulders, the left shoulder is slightly elevated. Next, we have the overhead squat assessment. This is a transitional assessment where you can see how the subject carries their weight while moving. For the first view of for the overhead squat assessment, it is the anterior view. For the foot and ankle, the feet are slightly externally rotated with the knees moving outward. The LPHC, there's an asymmetrical weight shift to the right side, and the shoulders are more abducted as opposed to adducted. Here's a video of the subject completing the overhead squat assessment in the anterior view. As you can see, he is wobbling with his knees going in and out while he's going down into his squat, and his heels are slightly raising. In the lateral view, for the foot and ankle, nothing seems abnormal. For his knees, it is the same, nothing seems abnormal. For his LPHC, there's a low back arch, and for his shoulders, there is slight shoulder elevation. Here's a video for the lateral side of the overhead squat assessment. As you can see, the subject does arch their back, and they have to reposition their feet. They are still slightly unbalanced. This is the last view for the overhead squat assessment, which is the posterior view. For the foot and ankle, their right foot pronates. For their knees, nothing seems super abnormal. The LPHC, there's an asymmetrical weight shift to the right side, and for the shoulders, they are abducted again. Here's a video for the overhead squat assessment, posterior view. Here, the subject had to place their hands on the wall to balance themselves going down to the first squat. There, you can see the knees moving in and out again for feet pronation and unbalanced. Next, we have star balance excursion test and the single leg squat test. The star balance excursion test, there is a video that will be played. The subject has to plant their foot on one foot on the ground while moving their other foot and forward to the side and back. As you can see, the subject is kind of unbalanced with one leg, and this leg they are more unbalanced than the other. Especially when moving their foot from going back to the front, they had to place their foot down. The subject had a little fun and did a little jig dance at the end as well. Here is a single leg squat assessment for the anterior side. You can see that there is slight inward trunk rotation, and the subject is slightly unbalanced as well, and he could not go down very far into the squat. For the lateral side, they are again unbalanced because, as you can see, the subject had to place their right foot down on the ground, and they could not go very far into the squat. Lastly, for the posterior side, there is a hip hike, inward trunk rotation, and they are unbalanced as well again. Next, we have 3 range of motion tests completed to test and see how far the subject can move. The 3 tests done for the knee extension with their hip flexed, knee internal rotation, and hip extension. For knee extension, hip flexed, the subject's position was supine with their hip flexed at 90 degrees and knee flexed at 90 degrees. The axis rotation on the goniometer was the lateral joint of the tibial-femoral joint. The stationary arm is the lateral midline of the femur. Mobile arm is on the lateral midline of the fibula. Normal range of motion for knee extension is 20 degrees. With your subject lying supine, you instruct them to extend their leg, straightening out their knee as far as possible. Subject's range of motion in this test was 30 degrees. Hip internal rotation. Subject's position is supine with their hip flexed to 90 and 0 degrees of abduction and adduction with their knee at 90 degrees. The axis rotation is placed over the anterior aspect of the patella. The stationary arm is parallel to an imaginary line down the center of the body. Mobile arm is the anterior midline of the lower leg in reference to the tibial tuberosity. Normal range of motion for hip internal rotation is 45 degrees. Here, while you have your subject lying supine with their hip flexed, you instruct them to move their leg outward away from the midline of their body, their lower leg only. Subject's range of motion for this test was 45 degrees. The last range of motion test we did was hip extension. Although we did the test based off of the kinesiology lab manual, but it had the same normal range of motion. For this position, the subject is prone with their knees extended. The axis of rotation is over the greater trochanter of the femur. The stationary arm is along the midline of the pelvis, and the mobile arm is aligned with the lateral epicondyle of the femur. The subject is instructed to extend their hip backwards by lifting up their leg off of the ground. Normal range of motion is 10 degrees, while the subject's range of motion was 8 degrees. Next, we completed 3 manual muscle tests, which is done by isolating one muscle and testing it and giving it a numerical value based on what the tester deems as right. The 3 manual muscle tests completed here is the adductor complex, the medial hamstrings, and the gluteus maximus. As mentioned previously, there's a numerical score given for the manual muscle test. A 3 will be given to the subject if everything seems normal. A 2 will be given to the subject if there is compensation, meaning other muscles are used to be part of the resistance. And a 1 will be given to the subject if there is little to no activity when the tester applies pressure. For the first test, there was the adductor complex. The subject's position is supine with the hip flexed and the knee extended, thighs placed in internal rotation and adduction. The tester then stabilizes the opposite leg and applies slight pressure to the lower leg and a hip extension, abduction, and external rotation. When the subject completed this test, there was slight compensation, so they were given a 2. The next test is the medial hamstrings. The subject is supine with their knee flexed between 50 and 70 degrees. Their thigh is placed in slight internal rotation, and the tibia is in slight internal rotation as well. You then stabilize the upper leg below the knee and apply slight pressure to the posterior side of the leg in the direction of knee extension and tibia external rotation. The subject was given a strength level of 2 because there was slight compensation observed. The last manual muscle test is the gluteus maximus. The subject is lying prone with their hip in extension and the knee flexed, and the thigh is placed in external rotation and abduction. Supporting the opposite hip, apply slight pressure to the upper leg above the knee in the direction of hip flexion, adduction, and internal rotation. Again, the subject was given a strength level of 2 because there was slight compensation observed. Now that all the tests have been completed, here are what the subject's potential overactive and underactive muscles are. For potential overactive muscles, The subject could have biceps femoris, glute med, and TFL and a piriformis overactive. For potential underactive, there could be medial hamstrings, adductors, and gluteus maximus. Now that it has been determined what is potentially underactive and overactive, the subject is now taken through the 4 phases of the corrective exercises continuum. The first phase is the inhibit phase, which is used to decrease activity of the overactive neuromyofascial tissues. In other words, release the tension. Here the subject is using a foam roller to SMR one muscle that is potentially overactive, the TFL. He hunts to find the tender spot and then rolls it off for 30 seconds. This can be done daily. The next phase is the lengthen phase. The purpose of this phase is to increase the extensibility, length, and range of motion of the neuromyofascial tissues. Here the subject is standing and lengthening his TFL, which was previously inhibited for 30 seconds. Here the subject can stretch the TFL for 20 to 30 seconds, which can also be done daily. The third stage is the activation stage, where the purpose is to re-educate and increase activation of the underactive tissues. The subject is completing an isolated strengthening exercise that is using his adductors as the prime mover. The subject does this in 2 sets, each consisting of 10 reps, with a 2-second hold once his leg is adducted. This is to be done 3 to 5 times a week. The final stage of the corrective exercise continuum is integration. Integration is used to retrain muscles to work together as a collective synergist to perform the action. The subject here is performing a step up with overhead press. The subject completes this by completing 1, 2, 3 sets with reps of 10, slowly and controlled 3 to 5 times a week. After the subject completed the 4 phases of the corrective exercises continuum 1 time, a reevaluation of his overhead squat was done to see if there was any improvements when looking at his knees. Here, you can see that there was not very much improvement because the corrective exercise continuum was only done once as opposed to many times. In the anterior portion, you can still see that the subject has his knees moving outwards, and again in the posterior aspect. Here are the references for this video.